Loyalty doesn't create entitlement.
You're right. But by tomorrow morning, you'll discover what my loyalty was protecting.
By 6:47 a.m., 9 resignations were waiting in HR.
Loyalty doesn't create entitlement. My boss said as he pushed my approved PRN letter into the shredder. Then he gave my vice president position to a man who had worked there for 6 weeks. I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply walked out. Because by sunrise, he was going to learn that the letter was not the most valuable thing he had destroyed. Hello, my name is Elena Carter, and for 8 years, I helped build a logistics company called North Star Distribution from a struggling regional operation into one of the most trusted supply chain firms in the Midwest. This is the story of how one arrogant executive mistook my silence for weakness, how 9 resignations arrived in human resources before 6:47 the next morning, and how the company finally discovered what my loyalty had been protecting. When I joined North Star, we had 32 employees, 2 major clients, and a warehouse roof that leaked whenever it rained. I was hired as an operations analyst, which sounded impressive until you saw my desk. It was a folding table beside a broken printer. But I loved the work. I built routing models. I fixed billing errors. I sat with drivers at 2 in the morning when winter storms closed the interstate. When a hospital client needed emergency medical supplies delivered during a blizzard, I designed the backup plan that got the trucks through. Over time, people started coming to me when something important broke. Then they started coming to me before it broke. That difference changed everything. I created our risk response system, rebuilt our client onboarding process, and trained the managers who eventually led every major department. Revenue tripled. Staff grew from 32 people to nearly 400. We expanded into 5 states. And while executives accepted awards on stage, I was usually backstage checking that the next morning's shipments would leave on time. I did not mind. At least, not then. North Star's founder, Thomas Bell, noticed my work. He was demanding but fair. 2 years before he retired, he began preparing me to become vice president of operations. He never made secret promises. Everything was documented. I completed an executive leadership program. I took over 3 failing divisions and made each profitable. I was given written performance targets, and I exceeded all of them. The board's compensation committee approved the salary range. Legal reviewed the job description. HR drafted the promotion letter. The final document was signed by Thomas, our chief financial officer, and 2 board members. My promotion was supposed to be announced on Monday morning. Then, on Friday afternoon, Thomas suffered a serious stroke. He survived, but his family asked him to step away immediately. The board appointed our chief commercial officer, Grant Holloway, as interim CEO. Grant was polished, confident, and always smiling when a camera was nearby. He also hated anything had not created himself. On Monday, instead of announcing my promotion, Grant postponed the meeting. Leadership transition, he said. We need a little time. I gave him that time. 2 weeks later, he hired a man named Mason Reed as a senior strategy advisor. Mason arrived in a tailored suit with expensive cufflinks and no understanding of our business. His previous experience was in management consulting. He spoke in phrases like operational velocity and enterprise alignment, but he did not know the difference between a distribution center and a cross-dock. On his 3rd day, he suggested cutting our overnight maintenance crew to save money. I explained that doing so would risk equipment failure during the morning loading window. He smiled and said, "Sometimes institutional people are too close to the old way of thinking." Institutional people. That was what he called the employees who had built the company. 6 weeks after Mason arrived, Grant summoned me to the executive conference room. My promotion letter was lying on the table. For one hopeful second, I thought the delay was finally over. Grant sat across from me. Mason stood near the window, looking down at the parking lot as if the building already belonged to him. Grant tapped the letter with one finger. Thomas made commitments before the board had a complete view of the future, he said. The board approved that letter, I replied calmly. Under Thomas's recommendation, circumstances have changed. Then he told me the VP position would go to Mason. I asked one question. Which part of my performance failed to meet the written requirements? Grant leaned back. This isn't about performance. It's about new leadership. Then why am I being asked to train him? Mason finally turned from the window. Because you know the details, he said. I'll handle the larger vision. The details. He meant the contracts, the systems, the people, the federal compliance rules, the union relationships, the emergency plans, and the clients responsible for 68% of our revenue. Grant picked up my promotion letter. I know you've been here a long time, Elena. But loyalty doesn't create entitlement. He stood, crossed to the shredder, and fed the letter into it. The machine came alive with a low mechanical growl. My name disappeared first, then the signatures. Then 8 years of promises, strips behind a plastic window. Grant watched my face, waiting for anger. I felt it. But I gave him nothing. Understood, I said. Mason frowned. He had expected a fight too. Grant handed me a folder titled Charles Plan. You'll spend the next 90 days transferring your knowledge to Mason. After that, we'll revisit your role. I opened the folder. My title had already been changed from Senior Director of Operations to Special Projects Manager. I would report to Mason, the man taking my job. That was when I understood this was not merely a bad decision. It was a plan to extract everything I knew and remove me afterward. I closed the folder. I'll review it, I said. Then I walked out without a scene. The first person who saw me was Denise Alvarez, our Director of Compliance. She had worked with me for 7 years and could read my expression better than most people read emails. What happened? She whispered. Mason got the position. She stared at me. But your letter was signed. Grant shredded it. Her face went still. I returned to my office, shut the door, and removed one personal photograph from my desk. I did not touch company files. I did not download client lists. I did not delete a single document. I wrote a resignation letter that contained 4 sentences. My resignation was effective immediately. I would return all company property. I would comply with the confidentiality terms in my contract. Future communication could go through my attorney. At 4:18 p.m., I sent it to HR Grant and the board chair. At 4:21, Grant called me. I let it ring. At 4:24, Mason appeared at my door. You can't leave immediately, he said. There has to be a transition. Your plan said my knowledge involved details. I'm sure your larger vision will manage them. His smile vanished. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I am resigning. Security escorted from the building at Grant's request. I walked past people I had hired, trained, defended, and trusted. I did not ask anyone to follow me. I did not need to. That evening, I turned off my phone and made dinner with my husband, Daniel. Halfway through the meal, he asked if I was all right. Not yet, I said. But I will be. At 9:30, I turned my phone back on. There were 43 messages. The first was from Denise. They want me to certify Mason as qualified to oversee federal compliance. I refused. The next was from Patrick Lee, Director of Fleet Operations. Grant told us you chose to leave because you were not ready for executive responsibility. Is that true? I replied with only the facts. My approved promotion was withdrawn. The position was given to Mason. I was ordered to train him and accept a demotion. I resigned. I am not asking anyone else to do anything. Patrick answered 1 minute later. You don't have to ask. That was the first moment I realized what Grant had misunderstood. He thought my power came from a title. It did not. It came from trust. For years, North Star's leadership team had been offered jobs by competitors. Most stayed because we believed we were building something together. We had an informal promise. If one of us saw a serious ethical or safety problem, we would not hide it from the others. My shredded letter was not the problem by itself. It was proof of a deeper problem they had already begun to see. Grant had quietly frozen safety hires. Mason had pressured accounting to move expenses into the next quarter. A vendor selection was being redirected toward companies connected to one of Grant's former business partners. And now they wanted Denise to certify an unqualified executive for regulated work. At 10:20 p.m., Denise resigned. At 10:32, Patrick resigned. By midnight, the heads of client services, procurement, safety, regional operations, and data security had submitted notices too. 8 resignations, plus mine. 9 in total. None of us coordinated dates. None of us shared confidential information. Each person made an individual decision after seeing the same truth. A North Star's new leadership expected our integrity to be as disposable as my promotion letter. At 6:47 the next morning, HR forwarded all 9 resignations to the board. Grant still did not understand what he had broken. At 7:05, he sent a company-wide email. He described the departures as a limited resistance to modernization. He announced Mason would personally oversee continuity. At 7:18, the first major client called. St. Catherine Health Network had a contract requiring named compliance leaders and approved emergency response team. Denise and I were 2 of the 4 designated officers. Our resignations triggered a mandatory review. At 7:41, a national grocery chain paused its expansion agreement. At 18:03, our insurance carrier requested documentation about the vacant safety position. At 18:20, 3 warehouse managers informed HR that they would not accept instructions that violated established safety procedures. At 18:37, Mason called me from Grant's phone. Elena, we need access to the Red Harbor protocol. Red Harbor was our emergency operating plan for a simultaneous software outage and transportation disruption. It is in the company system, I said. We can't find the activation sequence. The procedure is in the continuity manual. The manual references approval from the incident council. Who is on the council? The names are in the manual. There was a long pause. 6 of the 8 council members had resigned. Mason lowered his voice. Can you come in for a few hours? No. We will pay a consulting rate. No, you're putting the company at risk. That sentence almost made me laugh. I built the safeguards that protect the company. You removed the people authorized to use them. You resigned. Yes, And I left every company document exactly where it belongs. I ended the call. An hour later, my attorney received a letter accusing me of organizing a coordinated walkout and interfering with client relationships. Grant had finally moved from arrogance to panic. But panic makes careless people dangerous. We began an investigation of our own, not into North Star's trade secrets, but into the decisions surrounding my promotion. My attorney requested preservation of emails, board minutes, HR records, and security footage from the executive conference room. The shredded document itself was only paper. The approval trail still existed. Then Denise called with something more serious. Before resigning, she had filed an internal compliance report. Mason had asked her to sign a federal vendor certification dated 2 weeks before he joined the company. He said it was just administrative cleanup, she told me. Did you keep a personal copy? No, it belongs to the company. But the report number and submission receipt were automatically emailed to me. That receipt mattered. If the report disappeared, the audit log would show who removed it. The mystery grew when the board chair, Evelyn Shaw, called me that afternoon. Did Thomas give you any documents outside the normal promotion packet? She asked. I remembered a sealed envelope he had handed me 3 days before his stroke. Keep this at home, he had said. Open it only if someone tries to reverse the succession plan without a board vote. I had assumed it contained a personal letter. With Evelyn on the phone, I opened it. Inside was a copy of a board resolution. It did more than approve my promotion. It appointed me as interim operational successor if Thomas became medically unable to serve before a permanent CEO was elected. Grant had never been authorized to replace me. He had been appointed interim CEO for commercial and administrative matters, but the resolution specifically reserved operational control for me during the transition. There was also a handwritten note from Thomas. Elena, systems can survive mistakes. They cannot survive leaders who punish truth. Protect the people first. I sent the resolution to my attorney and Evelyn. The board called an emergency meeting for 6:00 p.m. Grant tried to block me from attending. Evelyn overruled him. I returned to North Star less than 24 hours after security had escorted me out. This time, the board's outside counsel met me in the lobby. Grant sat at the far end of the conference table. Mason was beside him. Neither man looked confident anymore. Evelyn began with the 9 resignations, the client reviews, and the operational disruption. Then outside counsel displayed the succession resolution on the screen. Grant claimed he had never seen it. The corporate secretary opened the electronic board archive. The document showed Grant's digital acknowledgement from 5 weeks earlier. He changed his story. He said he believed the resolution was no longer applicable. Based on which board vote? Evelyn asked. Grant had no answer. Then Denise's compliance report appeared on the screen. It had been removed from the active system at 11:52 the previous night, after she resigned. The deletion came from Mason's administrator account. Mason immediately blamed an assistant. Data security restored the access logs. No assistant had used his credentials. The login came from Mason's company laptop inside Grant's office. The room went silent. That was the moment their partnership collapsed. Mason said Grant told him to delete the report. Grant called him a liar. Mason produced text messages. The messages revealed why he had been hired. Grant planned to replace experienced department heads with cheaper executives loyal to him. Mason's promotion was the first step. My 90-day transition was designed to transfer the relationships and operating knowledge before I was pushed out. The board also learned Grant had discussed awarding a large vendor contract to his former partner without disclosing the relationship. The betrayal was bigger than my promotion. My shredded letter had only pulled the first loose thread. By the end of the meeting, Grant was placed on administrative leave. Mason's employment was terminated for cause. The board referred the compliance matter to outside investigators and the appropriate authorities. Then Evelyn turned to me. We want you to return as interim chief operating officer. It was more authority than the VP position Grant had destroyed, but I did not accept immediately. I have conditions, I said. I asked for an independent ethics hotline reporting to the board, written protections for employees who refused unsafe or unlawful orders, transparent promotion criteria, and a formal review of compensation for the managers who had been performing executive work without executive pay. I also required that every employee who resigned be offered reinstatement without retaliation. Evelyn agreed to put the conditions to a vote. The vote was unanimous. 7 of the other 8 leaders returned. 1 chose a new opportunity, and I respected that. Nobody was punished for leaving. Nobody was asked to pretend the damage had never happened. Repairing North Star took months. We met with clients, disclosed the leadership failure, and showed them the controls we were adding. Some contracts were delayed, but none of our major clients left. Employees who had been afraid to speak began reporting problems early. We discovered small issues before they became expensive ones. Thomas recovered enough to attend a company meeting by video. He looked older and tired, but his voice was steady. A company is not its logo, he said. It is the promises people keep when keeping them becomes inconvenient. I never forgot that. 6 months later, the board removed the word interim from my title. I became Northstar's chief operating officer. Grant resigned before the investigation concluded. His severance was denied under the misconduct clause in his contract. Mason disappeared from the polished business conferences, where he once spoke about leadership. But the most satisfying moment did not happen in a boardroom. It happened one rainy Monday morning when I walked through the original warehouse. The roof no longer leaked. A young analyst was working at a proper desk near the operations center. She stopped me and said, "Ems Carter, is it true you almost left for good?" "Yes," I said. "Why did you come back?" I looked around at the drivers, planners, mechanics, managers, and coordinators who kept the company alive every day. Because the wrong people tried to own something that belonged to all of us. For 8 years, I had believed loyalty meant staying, enduring, and proving my value one more time. I was wrong. Loyalty is not obedience. It is not silence. And it is never permission for someone to use your devotion against you. Grant was right about one thing. Loyalty does not create entitlement. But he misunderstood who felt entitled. I never believed I was entitled to a title I had not earned. He believed he was entitled to the people, trust, and knowledge I had spent 8 years building. He shredded a letter because he thought paper was the source of my power. By 60:47 the next morning, 9 resignations proved him wrong. And when the dust finally settled, the lesson was clear: never confuse a loyal person's patience with permission. Because when respect is destroyed, loyalty does not beg to stay. It stands up, walks away, and takes the future with it.